We're picking up in part two of our lecture as we continue to discuss folk culture. And the group we're going to discuss next are known as the Arabers. Arabers. This term originates from fruit peddlers or street hawkers in England. And in the 1800s, the Arabers began to work in cities like Baltimore, Savannah, Charleston, New Orleans. So across the south and southeast part of the United States, you'd find these Arabers in all of our major cities. Arabers diffused farther north during the Great Migration. So they spread from, again, the southeastern concentration into northern cities. Today, Baltimore City is the last remaining place for the Araber population. This is a very small population. It's, as you can see here, limited practice with very few members. They exist and persist in West Baltimore, just northwest of the Inner Harbor. Remember, relative isolation. This group lives in the center of a major city, and living in the center of a major city allows for a lot of interaction, a lot of diffusion of popular culture. But this group has been able to again, persist outside of the material and non-material culture world of popular culture. Here's a picture of an Araber. His name is BJ. He's a fruit cart peddler that works through Baltimore City. Arabers, again, they've been working in Baltimore City for about 160 years. Following the Civil War, Arabing gave free Black Americans an opportunity to work. It was a relatively low-cost opportunity. Much like a taxi driver today, you could pay to rent the cab based on your fares. Arabers were able to sell produce and then pay to rent the horse. The Arabers that exist today are not only peddlers, but they are also farriers. They also practice animal husbandry. They raise the horses right in the middle of our cities. So as you go onto Fremont Street in West Baltimore, you'll find an image like this, an image of a man who was a prominent Araber atop stable tools. And then you might find an Araber changing a horseshoe. This occupation is known as a farrier, and this individual is tending to a horse that is raised and maintained and cared for right in the middle of a major city. Here's another image of B.J. Abdullah as he walks along West Mulberry Street, right downtown, right by Enoch Pratt Central Library, right by the Basilica, the main Catholic church in Baltimore City. So a site like this, many of you may have encountered Arabers. I previously lived in southeast Baltimore, and the Arabers used to come down about twice a week down the end of my block. You would hear them calling out what they were carrying on their horse cart. So this lifestyle, again, it is a small homogeneous group. This is generally passed down from father to son or father to nephew or grandfather to grandson. They live in relative isolation. So while they peddle fruit throughout the city, they don't really adopt popular culture practices. They live within a small community of families that have been doing this for generations. And again, they are less affected by globalization. You can see here, BJ is using the same technology Arabers used in the 1800s, a cart and a horse. Globalization has threatened this group significantly, as the produce used to come right into the Baltimore's Inner Harbor area. And the Arabers were able to bring their carts down to the docks and load up and then hit the neighborhoods. Today, the wholesaling of produce is much different than it was. It's down closer to the airport today, which requires an automobile. So a lot of the Arabers don't drive. So they have a little bit more of a difficult time getting wholesale produce to bring through the neighborhoods. One of the major opportunities that Arabers have, one is combating food deserts. They enter some of the worst food deserts in Baltimore City. Food desert is a neighborhood that the nearest grocery store is over a mile away. So in those neighborhoods, it's over a mile to readily access fresh produce, fresh food. The Arabers are able to bring fresh produce into food deserts at a reasonable price. So the opportunity is there. During the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, they were bringing fresh food and including meat to older residents who were too afraid to go to the grocery store, too afraid to enter crowds. So these Arabers, they have a tremendous opportunity to build on their legacy, to um, to move into the 21st century and find a really important role in our city. Uh, in my opinion, what would be great would be as if the state would recognize our Arabers like they do our farmers, like they do our um, our sellers at farmers markets. Even our wine industry has become more and more protected by the state. So if the Arabers could actually get support from the state, support from the city, as opposed to additional hurdles, they could really persist well through the 21st century and fill a much needed role in our communities. So this is an interesting group. It's one that is relatively unknown throughout the rest of the country, but one that is very important to the history of Baltimore City and the history of this folk culture. We're going to wrap up this lecture by discussing the commodification of culture. And to commodify means to convert into exchange value, to assign a price tag to an item. And as we look around, we talked a little bit about the commodification of Amish culture, the reed wicker baskets that the Gela make. There's a commodification of that. If you enter that part of the country and you visit these folk cultures and they sell it, right? It's the value is much greater if you could go to where it was produced and engage the local culture. So the commodification of culture is done in a few ways. The first is through advertising. Something that we're constantly exposed to is advertising. Through advertising, we're able to manipulate demand and consumption. We're able to shape commodification and cultural practices. Um, Greiner uses the example of a diamond. The diamond carries with it a lot of material and non-material value. Diamonds are controlled by a cartel, small organizations that control the supply. So by limiting the supply, they're artificially increasing the price and also the demand. The non-material commodification of diamonds means love, right? Status, happiness, commitment. So think about how we've taken a piece of material culture like a diamond, something we could hold, and we've applied this non-material culture to it through advertising. In the mid-1900s, the De Beers company is the one who started this. They own most of the diamond supply around the world, and they were the ones that created this non-material culture, this commodification. And it's not just the diamond industry. Obviously, advertising is incredibly important. I know during the pandemic, a lot of automobile makers were starting to advertise getting outdoors, right? Getting away from people, being able to spread out, explore nature, right? That was the commodification, the price tag of getting out there. The second way that culture is commodified is through sports. Sports, we have a great connection with sports as human beings, whether it's a national team, whether it's an individual athlete, whether it's your local professional sports franchise. Uh, Americans in particular, and throughout really the world, we part of our identity is a sports team, right? That connection and support of a team. And when we're able to support that team, the organizations, the leagues are then able to commodify that commitment. They're able to sell us merchandise. They're able to sell us symbols, right? Material culture. They're also able to sell us tickets to experience the non-material culture, right? The roar of the fan, the excitement of being in the arena. So sports is another way in which we commodify culture. And then the third is heritage, the heritage industry, which looks at both the United States and world heritage, right? Where we set aside certain areas that we commodify the past. Gettysburg Battleground, the book depository in Dallas, Texas, Robben Island in South Africa, right? We identify these places as important to our past, and We set up entryways where people could pay a price to go in there and be there, experience it. Heritage has really grown since the 1980s, about the last 40 years or so. We've seen this rapid growth in the heritage industry, being somewhere important, right? That importance is totally non-material, whether it's religious, right? Whether it is the site of a historic battle, whether it's the site of the signing of an important document. These are all ways in which we could commodify heritage. Now, when we commodify heritage, we have some concerns. Uh, we'd like to make it accessible to as many people as possible, but at the same time, we simplify the message, right? Oftentimes we simplify the characters involved when we think about the pilgrims arriving from Europe in the 1620, right? We kind of simplify who they were, what their purpose was, what their message was. We sanitize it. We try to maybe gloss over, whitewash a lot of the ugliness. There's a tobacco plantation in Maryland called the Southerly Plantation, and it wasn't until the last decade that they recognized the slave quarters on the plantation. So they talked about, the American affluence and opportunity and risk that was paid off. And they talked about the tobacco culture. But for decades, they sanitized the importance of slavery and the dark side of it. Only until recently have we further engaged that and recognized the importance of owning people as property to making that success and that wealth. And they try to make it entertaining, right? I mean, our attention spans aren't the longest, and in order to capture our attention, oftentimes heritage will be manipulated to be more entertaining, more engaging to a mass audience. And it really is known as dissonance, when we take sacred sites and we try to make it inclusive to everybody. There's individuals who don't think that non-parishioners should go into a church or a mosque or a temple, or that people really shouldn't enter a military battleground, right? It's sacred space. But what we see in the heritage industry is trying to open that up to everybody, commodify that space. So it does somewhat come with some concerns. The benefit of the heritage industry is that it raises awareness of global cultural resources, right? It creates opportunities for economic development and also cultural development. But again, the cons, right? We simplify it, we sanitize it. We look at it maybe from just a certain perspective, right? A Eurocentric view or an American first vision. So there are some concerns when we sell this heritage industry. But again, it's just a way in which we commodify culture when we assign an exchange value to it. All right. This will wrap up our look at folk culture and the commodification of culture.